The knock came at 8:12 on a rainy Monday morning. Etta Olson opened the front door, still wearing Warren's old Yale sweatshirt, her hands cold from barely sleeping the night before. A man in a charcoal suit stood on the porch holding a leather folder. "Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked carefully. "I'm here regarding the legal removal notice filed against you." Behind him, a black Mercedes idled at the curb. Vivian Whitmore stepped out slowly, pearls shining against her cream coat, while Warren remained in the passenger seat, unable to look his wife in the eyes. Etta felt her chest cave in. Her mother-in-law had hired a lawyer to throw her out of her own home, and her husband had let it happen. But what happened 30 seconds later made every single one of them go silent. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you most, stay with this story until the end. Because sometimes the quietest woman in the room is the one holding the truth that destroys everything. 6 years earlier, before lawyers and betrayal and silence filled the rooms of the Whitmore house, Etta Olson had believed love was something you built slowly, carefully, like a home, not a fantasy, not fireworks, a home. She met Warren Whitmore at a charity gala in Manhattan during a December snowstorm. Etta had only attended because her client, a luxury furniture company, needed their showroom redesigned before the holidays, and the CEO had dragged her along to network with rich people. She remembered standing near the champagne tower, uncomfortable in a navy satin dress she could barely afford, when Warren appeared beside her with an amused smile. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he had said. Etta laughed softly. "Is it that obvious, a little?" He was handsome in the polished old money kind of way. Dark coat, expensive watch, calm confidence. The type of man who never rushed because the world always waited for him. At first, Etta assumed he was arrogant. Then he spent 40 minutes talking to her about architecture, music, and why old homes felt more honest than modern mansions. By the end of the night, he walked her to her car and kissed her hand like men only did in movies. "You're different," he told her quietly. At 28 years old, Etta still believed those words meant something. 3 dates later, Warren took her to Connecticut to see the coastal town where he grew up. Large estates lined the quiet roads, white fences, private schools, country clubs, Whitmore territory. Etta remembered feeling underdressed, even in a cashmere sweater. "This place is beautiful," she whispered, as Warren drove past rows of massive homes glowing gold at sunset. "It's suffocating," he replied. She looked at him. "You hate it here. I hate what people here value." Back then, she believed him. That was the dangerous thing about Warren Whitmore. He knew exactly how to sound like a man with depth. The first time Etta met Vivian Whitmore, she understood immediately that Warren's mother disliked her. Vivian's smile never reached her eyes. "Oh," she said after looking Etta up and down. "You're creative. Not talented. Not impressive. Creative." The word landed like an insult, dressed as politeness. Charles Whitmore barely spoke during dinner, buried behind the financial section of the Wall Street Journal, while Vivian controlled every conversation at the table. Lindsay Whitmore, Warren's younger sister, spent most of the evening scrolling through her phone and making comments about people's shoes. Etta left that night emotionally exhausted. "You did great," Warren told her afterward while driving back to the city. "Your mother hates me. She hates everyone. But not equally." Warren laughed softly and reached for her hand. "She'll come around." Etta wanted desperately to believe that too. For a while, she thought she had. A year later, when Etta inherited money from her grandmother's estate after her passing in Oregon, she cried harder than she had in years. Her grandmother, June Olson, had raised her after Etta's parents divorced. June taught her how to sew curtains, paint walls, plant roses, and survive heartbreak without begging anyone to stay. "Never let anyone make you feel temporary," June used to say. The inheritance wasn't enormous by Whitmore standards, but it was enough for a down payment on a beautiful property overlooking Long Island Sound. When Etta found the house, it was old and neglected. Faded blue shutters, cracked hardwood floors, a dying garden. But she saw beauty in it immediately. Warren only saw potential resale value. "You really love this place," he had said, while standing in the empty kitchen. Etta smiled. "It feels lonely," she admitted, "like it's waiting for someone to care about it again." Warren wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. "Then let's make it ours." That sentence became the center of Etta's entire life. She used almost all of her inheritance for the down payment. She handled the renovations personally. Every wall color, every light fixture, every piece of furniture. She spent nights sketching layouts at the dining table while Warren slept upstairs after long days at his law firm. When contractors became difficult, she negotiated. When costs increased, she covered them. When Warren grew stressed about work, she told him not to worry about the house. "I've got it," she would say. And she did. What Etta never realized was how easily sacrifice becomes invisible to people who benefit from it every day. The mortgage payments came mostly from her accounts. Her freelance interior design business funded the renovations. Her inheritance paid for the custom kitchen Vivian later bragged about to her friends. But Warren never corrected anyone when they assumed he had purchased the home. At parties, people would clap him on the shoulder and say things like, "You're taking good care of your wife. You've done well for yourself. Beautiful house, Warren." And Warren would just smile. At first, Etta thought it didn't matter. They were married. A team? Why keep score? Then little things started changing. Vivian began introducing the property as my son's home. Warren stopped mentioning Etta's work entirely. When Etta booked fewer design projects to support Warren's growing career, his family treated it like proof she depended on him financially. Vivian especially enjoyed those moments. "There's something lovely about a woman focusing on her husband instead of chasing ambition," she once said over brunch. Etta smiled politely, while swallowing humiliation like medicine. The truth was, Warren's success depended on her stability. She hosted dinners for his clients, remembered birthdays, managed holidays, supported him through sleepless nights before major cases. When Charles developed heart issues, Etta spent 3 weeks helping Vivian coordinate appointments while Warren stayed focused on work. Not once did Vivian thank her. Instead, she told a neighbor, "Etta's very good at helping. Some women are simply natural support systems." Support systems. Not partners. Not equals. Etta ignored the ache in her chest because she loved Warren. Or maybe because she loved the version of Warren she met during that first winter in Manhattan. The version who kissed her hand. The version who said he hated shallow people. The version who looked at her like she mattered more than appearances. Sometimes, late at night, lying beside him in the dark, she still caught glimpses of that man. Warren would pull her against his chest and whisper dreams into her hair. "One day, this house will be full of our kids. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't know what I'd do without you." Those moments kept her loyal long after the warning signs appeared. Because love becomes dangerous when it keeps asking you to remember who someone used to be. 3 weeks before the lawyer appeared at her front door, Etta stood in the kitchen arranging white hydrangeas when Vivian walked in, unannounced. Vivian glanced around critically before setting her designer handbag on the marble counter. "You changed the dining chairs," she said. "I thought the room needed warmth." Vivian hummed dismissively. Then she looked directly at Etta. "The family is coming Sunday." Etta blinked. "For dinner. We need to discuss certain things. Your future. Warren's future." Something cold moved quietly through Etta's stomach. Vivian smiled. Not kindly. Not warmly. like someone preparing to remove a stain from expensive fabric. "The whole family will be there," she said softly. "Don't disappoint us." Then she walked out of the house like she belonged there more than Etta ever would. And for the first time in 6 years, Etta stood alone in her own kitchen feeling like a guest. Sunday dinner at the Whitmore house was never really dinner. It was performance, assessment, a quiet competition disguised as family tradition. And Etta Olson spent 6 years trying not to fail it. By 4 in the afternoon, the kitchen smelled like rosemary, garlic, and red wine reduction. Etta moved carefully between the stove and the marble island while soft jazz played from hidden speakers overhead. The dining room looked beautiful. Candles flickered against crystal glasses. White linen napkins sat folded perfectly beside polished silverware. Etta had even arranged fresh eucalyptus branches along the center of the table, because Vivian once mentioned seeing them at a dinner party in the Hamptons. Every detail had been chosen to avoid criticism. That was the exhausting thing about trying to earn love from people who already decided you were unworthy. You kept working harder for approval they never intended to give.
Warren entered the kitchen around 5 wearing a navy sweater and grey slacks, already dressed for the evening. "You cooked all this yourself?" he asked distractedly, while checking emails on his phone. Etta forced a small smile. "Mostly. That's a lot. It's your family." The words came out softer than she intended. Warren looked up briefly, then kissed her forehead absent-mindedly. "You worry too much." Etta stared at him after he walked away. That used to comfort her. Now it sounded like dismissal. At exactly 6:30, Vivian arrived first. Of course she did. Vivian never entered a room quietly. Her presence always felt deliberate, staged somehow. She wore cream silk and diamonds, despite this supposedly being just family dinner. The moment she stepped inside, her eyes began scanning the house, judging, evaluating. "You changed the entry table," she noted immediately. Etta nodded. The old one felt too dark for the space. Vivian touched the wood surface lightly. I suppose it works. Not praise. Never praise. Just temporary tolerance." Charles arrived behind her, looking tired and detached as usual. Lindsay followed 10 minutes later, carrying a bottle of wine and enough attitude for 3 people. "Oh my God!" Lindsay laughed while handing Etta the bottle. "You really went full Martha Stewart tonight." Etta smiled politely. "I thought it would be nice." Lindsay glanced around the dining room. "You always try so hard." "Honestly, it's kind of impressive." The comment sounded harmless on the surface. But Etta heard the insult underneath it. Try hard. Desperate. Warren finally came downstairs, just as everyone settled into the living room with drinks. Vivian's entire face softened when she looked at her son. "There he is," she said warmly. "You look exhausted, sweetheart. Are they overworking you again?" Warren smiled. "Comes with the territory. You need someone taking proper care of you." Etta stood 3 feet away, holding a tray of appetizers. Vivian didn't even look at her when she said it. Dinner started quietly enough. The kind of upper-class American dinner where nobody raised their voice, but every sentence carried hidden meaning. Charles talked about market trends. Lindsay complained about a yoga instructor. Vivian asked Warren about a new corporate client in Boston. Etta mostly listened while serving plates and refilling wine glasses. At one point, Charles complimented the food. "This is excellent," he admitted after tasting the short ribs. Before Etta could thank him, Vivian spoke. "She's always been good domestically." Etta felt something tighten painfully in her chest. Domestically. Like a household appliance. Warren kept eating. The conversation shifted toward Warren's firm. "We had another partner dinner Thursday night," Warren said casually. Vivian smiled proudly. "And looks promising."
I heard Gregory Hale may retire within a few years. Lindsay leaned forward immediately. That could put Warren on track for senior leadership. Vivian practically glowed. Well, Warren was always meant for bigger things. Etta looked at her husband. He looked happy, admired, seen. Then Vivian turned toward Etta with that same polite cruelty she wore like perfume. Corporate life is difficult for ambitious men, she said. They need wives who understand how to elevate them socially. Etta placed her wineglass down carefully. I support Warren however I can. Vivian smiled faintly. Yes. You do support. Again that word. Support. Never equal, never partner. Just useful. Lindsay sipped her wine. I still think it's wild you stopped taking major clients, she said to Etta. Didn't you used to have actual celebrity projects? A few. So now, what do you do all day? The question landed exactly how Lindsay intended it to. Warren finally spoke. Etta handles the house. The house. Not her business. Not her career. Not the years she spent helping him build stability. Just the house. Etta felt heat rising beneath her skin. Vivian dabbed her mouth delicately with a napkin. And she does it beautifully. Every successful man benefits from peace at home. Something inside Etta cracked quietly. Because Warren still said nothing, not once. Not when his mother diminished her. Not when Lindsay mocked her. Not when years of sacrifice were reduced to decorating and cooking. He just sat there, accepting admiration built partly from her labor. Then Vivian delivered the real blow. You know who I ran into recently? She asked brightly. Claire Holloway. The atmosphere changed instantly. Warren's shoulders stiffened almost invisibly. Lindsay smirked into her wineglass. Etta noticed both reactions immediately. Vivian continued casually. She's extraordinary. Brilliant woman. So polished. Charles looked uncomfortable. She's one of Warren's associates, right? Senior associate, Vivian corrected. And from an excellent family. Etta suddenly couldn't taste her food anymore. Vivian looked directly at Warren. She reminds me of the kind of women successful men used to marry. Silence. A horrible, heavy silence. Etta waited for Warren to stop this, to defend her, to say enough. Instead, he reached for his water and drank. That hurt more than if he'd agreed out loud. Lindsay gave Etta a fake sympathetic smile. I mean, corporate wives have a certain image now. Networking appearances, social strategy. Her eyes drifted deliberately over Etta's simple cream dress. No offense. The room suddenly felt too warm, too small. Etta excused herself quietly and carried empty dishes toward the kitchen before anyone could see her expression break. The moment she stepped away from the dining room, she pressed both hands against the counter and inhaled shakily. Her reflection stared back at her through the dark kitchen window. Tired eyes, forced smile. A woman shrinking smaller every year to keep peace for people who enjoyed watching her disappear. She heard footsteps behind her. Warren entered the kitchen holding his phone. You okay? He asked casually. Etta looked at him in disbelief. Am I okay? You're overthinking my mother again. Overthinking. That word. Always that word. She humiliated me at dinner. She was making conversation. No Warren. She was comparing me to another woman in front of you. He sighed immediately like she was exhausting him. Claire works at the firm. Mom likes her professionally. That's all. Etta stared at him. Do you? His jaw tightened slightly. You're being dramatic. The cruelty of that sentence wasn't loud. That was what made it worse. Etta looked away before he could see tears forming. I need air, she whispered. Warren's phone buzzed against the marble counter between them. Neither of them meant to look at it, but they both did. and time stopped. The message preview glowed brightly across the screen. I miss waking up beside you already. Claire. Etta's entire body went still. The blood drained from her face so fast she thought she might collapse. For one unbearable second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Etta slowly lifted her eyes toward her husband. Warren was already staring at her. Not shocked, she found out. Not guilty enough. Just caught. And somehow annoyed. Like this was inconvenient for him. The pain that tore through Etta in that moment was so sharp, it almost felt physical. 6 years. 6 years of loyalty, sacrifice, humiliation. And suddenly, every lonely night, every cold silence, every dismissed feeling rearranged itself into one horrifying truth. She had never been paranoid. She had simply been the last person willing to admit her husband no longer loved her. The message stayed burned into Etta's mind long after dinner ended. I miss waking up beside you already. Not flirtation, not ambiguity, intimacy, history, a relationship. Warren grabbed his phone too quickly, locking the screen before speaking. Etta. How long? Her voice barely sounded like hers. The sounds of silverware and conversation drifted faintly from the dining room, while the world inside the kitchen narrowed into something cold and unbearable. Warren rubbed his jaw in frustration. It's not what you think. Etta almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because men always said that right before destroying someone. Then explain it to me, she whispered. He lowered his voice immediately. My family is in the next room. The sentence hit her harder than the cheating. Not that you're hurt, not I'm sorry, just don't embarrass me in front of them. Etta stared at him for several long seconds before stepping backward. You care more about looking loyal than being loyal. His expression hardened instantly. There you go. There I go what, making everything dramatic. Etta felt something inside her collapse completely. That was Warren's favorite weapon. Not rage, not screaming. Reduction. He made emotion sound irrational until she questioned her own pain. The first time he used that tone on her was 2 years into their marriage, after he forgot their anniversary dinner. You're overreacting. Then, when he cancelled the vacation, because Claire needed help preparing for litigation, you're being sensitive. Then when Etta cried after another cruel dinner with Vivian, you take things too personally. Tiny cuts, tiny dismissals. So small individually, devastating together. Etta looked toward the dining room where Vivian's laughter echoed softly through candlelight. Everything suddenly made sense. Claire's name appearing more often, Warren protecting his phone, the distance in bed, the late nights, the sudden obsession with privacy. And worst of all, how comfortable Vivian seemed with it. You knew, Etta said quietly. Warren's eyes narrowed slightly. Knew what my mother-in-law knows about her. He scoffed softly. Mom likes Claire professionally. Stop lying to me. The words came out sharper than anything she'd ever said to him before. For the first time all night, Warren looked genuinely irritated. You want the truth? He snapped quietly. Claire understands my world. Etta froze. The cruelty of honesty always arrived late. What does that mean? It means she gets the pressure I'm under. The expectations. The networking. The lifestyle. Etta stared at him in disbelief. I built your lifestyle. You decorated a house. The sentence landed like a slap. Silence filled the kitchen. Warren realized too late what he'd said. But Etta had already heard it. Every sacrificed career opportunity, every mortgage payment, every dinner party, every lonely night supporting him while he climbed professionally, reduced to decoration, Something dangerous began waking up beneath her heartbreak. Not anger yet, clarity. And clarity was far more terrifying. Voices approached from the dining room. Warren immediately lowered his tone again. We'll discuss this later. No. They wouldn't. Because Etta suddenly understood something horrifying. Warren believed he controlled this conversation. He believed she would cry, forgive, adapt, and survive around his betrayal the same way she survived around Vivian's cruelty. Because she always had. Lindsay entered the kitchen, carrying empty wine glasses. Everything okay in here? She asked, though the smile on her face suggested she already knew the answer. Warren answered first. Fine. Etta looked directly at her sister-in-law. How long has Vivian known about Claire? Lindsay's smile disappeared. Excuse me, you heard me? Warren's jaw tightened. Etta. But she didn't look at him. Not anymore. Lindsay crossed her arms defensively. I think you should calm down before accusing people of things. There it was again. Calm down. The anthem of people doing cruel things comfortably. Etta suddenly felt exhausted beyond words. Not dramatic exhausted, soul exhausted. The kind that comes from loving people who slowly teach you your pain is inconvenient. Without another word, she walked past them and headed upstairs. She heard Warren follow moments later. Etta stopped. She entered the bedroom and turned on the lamp beside the bed. Warm amber light flooded across soft grey walls she had chosen herself. Everything in the room carried her touch. The linen curtains, the oak nightstands, the framed photographs. A life she designed around a man who no longer respected her. Warren shut the bedroom door behind him. You're spiraling. Etta turned slowly. Do you hear yourself? I said we'd talk. You lied to my face for months. It wasn't serious. The sentence almost destroyed her. Because men only called betrayal not serious when it hurt someone else. How long? She asked again. Warren looked away briefly. That's not important. Her eyes filled immediately. Not important. It happened during a rough period. A rough period. Etta laughed bitterly. You mean while I was helping your father recover after surgery? While I was managing this entire house alone because you said work was stressful? Warren exhaled sharply. This is exactly why I didn't want you finding out like this. Not I regret hurting you. Only I regret the inconvenience. Etta sat slowly on the edge of the bed because her legs suddenly felt weak. Do you love her? Warren hesitated. That hesitation answered everything. Tears blurred Etta's vision instantly. Oh my God. It's complicated. No, she whispered. It's actually very simple. The room felt painfully quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Downstairs, Vivian's laughter floated upward again, like something haunting. Then Warren said, the thing that finally changed something inside her forever. You've changed, Etta. She looked up slowly. What used to be easier to talk to? Etta stared at him in disbelief so profound it almost numbed her. Easier. Translation: less questioning, less emotional, less aware. Warren sat across from her, leaning forward like he was the reasonable one. You've become unhappy with everything lately. Because my husband is cheating on me, you're emotionally shutting down. Etta blinked slowly. It was almost impressive. How quickly he turned betrayal into her failure. How long have you been trying to convince yourself I'm the problem? She asked quietly. Warren rubbed his temples. I can't do this tonight. Then his phone buzzed again. This time, Etta watched his face carefully. The micro-expression, the panic, the instinctive protectiveness. Claire. Without thinking, Warren flipped the phone face down. Etta noticed. Of course she noticed. Women always noticed the exact moment they stopped being chosen. Something icy settled into her chest. Not peace,
but the beginning of emotional survival. Answer it, she said calmly. What, Claire? Answer her. Warren stared at her. I'm not doing this. No, Etta whispered. You already did. He stood abruptly. You need sleep. Again. Like her pain was exhaustion. Like betrayal was hormones. Like she was irrational instead of wounded. Warren grabbed a blanket from the chair. I'm staying in the guest room tonight. Etta nodded once. Okay. The simplicity of her response seemed to unsettle him more than screaming would have. At the doorway he paused. We'll figure this out. Etta looked at the wedding photo sitting on the dresser beside him. Two people smiling in golden summer light. A marriage that already looked dead now. Then she said quietly, I think you already did. Warren left without answering. The moment the door closed, the silence inside the bedroom became enormous. Etta sat motionless for several minutes. Then slowly, mechanically, she reached for Warren's iPad, charging beside the bookshelf. She knew the password. She always had. For years, she never checked, because trust had once felt natural between them. Now her hands trembled as she opened the messages. And there she was. Claire Holloway. Beautiful profile photo. Elegant smile. Months of conversations. Hotel reservations. Private jokes. Photos. Plans. Intimacy. But one message made Etta stop breathing completely. From Warren. Once this divorce is handled, the house won't be an issue. Etta stared at the sentence as something cold and terrifying unfolded in her mind. Not guilt, not a mistake, a plan. Etta Olson did not sleep that night. She sat alone in the dim glow of the bedroom lamp while the rain streaked down the windows overlooking Long Island Sound. Warren stayed in the guest room downstairs, and sometime around 2 in the morning, she heard the back door open quietly, then close again an hour later. She didn't need to ask where he had gone. That was the strange thing about betrayal. Eventually the truth stopped feeling shocking and started feeling exhausting. By sunrise, the tears were gone. Not because the pain disappeared, because something inside her had finally gone numb. Etta stood slowly from the bed and walked into the bathroom. Her reflection looked unfamiliar. Pale skin, swollen eyes, hair tangled from hours of silent crying. She touched the marble countertop she had chosen herself during renovations. Carrara marble, imported hardware, custom lighting. Every inch of this house carried pieces of her labor, and Warren planned to hand it to another woman like it had never belonged to Etta at all. For the first time since discovering the affair, anger finally arrived. Quiet anger, the dangerous kind. Not screaming, not breaking plates. Clarity. She washed her face carefully, tied her hair back and walked downstairs. Warren sat in the kitchen drinking espresso while scrolling through emails on his phone as if nothing catastrophic had happened. The audacity of normal behavior after betrayal almost impressed her. He looked up cautiously when she entered. You okay? Etta stared at him for a long moment. No apology, no shame, just discomfort. I'm making coffee, she said calmly. Warren blinked slightly, clearly expecting emotional chaos. Instead, Etta moved around the kitchen with terrifying composure. She poured coffee into a white ceramic mug, added oat milk, stirred once. Warren watched her carefully. I think we should talk later when emotions settle. Etta almost smiled. Emotions. As if discovering your husband planned a future with another woman was some temporary mood swing. She leaned lightly against the counter. How long have you been planning to divorce me? Warren's expression tightened immediately. Nobody said divorce.
You texted Claire about it. Silence. Caught. Again. Warren exhaled slowly like she was making his morning difficult. You invaded my privacy. That sentence told Etta everything she needed to know about the kind of man he truly was. Not remorse, not guilt, entitlement. She nodded once. I see. Warren rubbed the bridge of his nose. Things have been complicated between us for a while. Complicated enough for you to sleep with another woman? You're twisting this. Etta looked at him steadily. No. I'm finally seeing it clearly. That unsettled him. She could tell. Warren was comfortable with emotional Etta. Crying Etta. Forgiving Etta. But calm Etta frightened him. Because calm women stop negotiating for love. He stood and grabbed his briefcase. I have meetings all day. Of course he did. Corporate America continued even while marriages died. At the doorway, Warren hesitated. We don't need lawyers involved yet. Yet. Not never. Yet. Etta felt something cold settle deeper into her chest. Interesting choice of words. Warren's jaw tightened. You know what I mean. Then he left. No kiss goodbye. No softness. Just the sound of the front door closing on 6 years of illusion. The silence afterward felt enormous. Etta stood motionless for several seconds before walking slowly toward Warren's home office. The room smelled like expensive cologne and leather. Awards lined the shelves, framed degrees, photos from corporate events, an entire life built around image. Etta sat in his chair and opened the desk drawer. Bank statements, client files, expense reports. At first, she wasn't even sure what she was looking for. Then instinct took over. Women survived betrayal by learning patterns, and Warren had patterns. By noon, Etta had discovered enough to make her stomach turn. Luxury hotel charges, wine purchases, private weekend flights, jewelry payments. Most paid through their joint account. Their money. Money Etta contributed to for years. She leaned back slowly in the chair staring at the numbers. Warren hadn't just betrayed her emotionally. He financed the betrayal with her labor. A horrible laugh almost escaped her throat. Claire probably wore earrings purchased with renovation profits from Etta's design projects. The humiliation felt endless. Then Etta found something worse. An email confirmation for a luxury apartment viewing in Manhattan. 1 bedroom. High-rise. River view. The inquiry included both Warren Whitmore and Claire Holloway. Etta's chest tightened painfully. This wasn't reckless cheating. This was transition. Replacement. He wasn't destroying their marriage impulsively. He was building his next life while still living inside the one Etta created. That realization changed everything. Because heartbreak still leaves room for hope. Planning does not. By late afternoon, Etta sat at the dining room table, surrounded by paperwork. For years, she ignored financial details because she trusted Warren. Now, she examined everything. Mortgage statements, tax records, renovation invoices, property insurance. And slowly, piece by piece, another truth emerged. The house was legally protected under her inheritance structure. Only her name appeared as primary owner. Warren contributed monthly expenses, but the deed itself remained entirely under Etta Olson. A pulse of disbelief moved through her. How had Warren forgotten that? Then she realized the answer immediately. Because men like Warren stopped paying attention to women they believed they controlled. Her phone buzzed suddenly. Vivian? Etta stared at the screen before answering. Hello? Vivian's voice came smooth and elegant as ever. I assume emotions were high after dinner. Etta almost laughed. What a graceful way to describe discovering your son's affair. I'm handling it. I hope so, Vivian replied coolly. Public scenes help no one. There it was again. Image first. Always image first. Etta gripped the phone tighter. You knew about Claire. A pause. Then Vivian sighed softly. Warren deserves happiness. The sentence hit harder than Etta expected. Not because it hurt, because it revealed the truth so plainly. Vivian never viewed Etta as family. Only temporary furniture. And I didn't, Etta asked quietly. Vivian's tone sharpened slightly. You were comfortable, Etta. There's a difference. Comfortable, as if 6 years of loyalty was upholstery. Etta closed her eyes briefly. I supported your son through everything. And you should be proud of that. Proud. God. These people took from her so naturally, they didn't even hear themselves anymore. Then Vivian delivered the final insult. Dragging this out legally would be unpleasant for everyone. Especially you. Etta went very still. What does that mean? I'm simply saying dignity matters. Warren has resources, connections. It would be easier to leave gracefully, leave. The word echoed through Etta's body like ice water. Leave the home she bought. Leave the marriage Warren destroyed. Leave quietly so they could rewrite history comfortably. Suddenly, Etta understood the future they planned for her. The discarded wife, emotionally unstable, financially dependent, easy to remove. Vivian continued gently. A clean transition benefits everyone. Transition, like Etta was an employee being phased out. Something dangerous awakened fully inside her then, not vengeance. Self-respect, finally. You know something interesting, Vivian, Etta said softly. What's that? For years I thought kindness would make people value me. Vivian stayed silent. Etta's voice became calmer with every word, but all it did was teach them how much they could take. Then she hung up. Her hands trembled afterward. Not from fear, from adrenaline. For the first time in years, Etta Olson stopped trying to save her marriage. And the moment she did, she started seeing the battlefield clearly. That evening she searched one name online. Naomi Bennett, top divorce attorney in Connecticut, known for strategic settlements and brutal courtroom precision. Etta stared at the number for almost a full minute before calling. The receptionist transferred her immediately. A calm female voice answered. This is Naomi Bennett. Etta swallowed hard. My husband is planning to leave me, she whispered. A brief pause. Then Naomi spoke with terrifying steadiness. No, she said. Your husband is planning to underestimate you. Silence filled Etta's chest. Then Naomi added, and those are very different things. For the first time since the affair began, Etta felt something besides grief. Power. Small. Fragile. But real. That night before bed, Etta opened Warren's iPad one final time. And buried deep in archived emails, she found a message chain between Vivian Whitmore and the law office. Subject line, removal strategy. Prior to divorce proceedings. Etta's heartbeat slowed dangerously. They weren't just planning to leave her. They were planning to erase her. Monday arrived heavy with fog and ocean rain. The Whitmore house sat silent beneath a gray Connecticut sky, while Etta Olson stood barefoot in the kitchen, staring at the email Naomi Bennett had sent at 5:43 that morning. Do not panic. Do not leave the property voluntarily. Do not reveal what you know yet. Let them underestimate you. Etta read the message 3 times. Then she closed her laptop slowly and looked around the kitchen she once imagined raising children in. For years, this house had represented love to her. Now it looked like evidence. Warren came downstairs around 7, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, and the same expensive watch Etta bought him for his 35th birthday. The irony almost made her sick. He paused when he saw her already awake. "You're up early." Etta wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "So are you?" An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Warren looked exhausted. There were dark shadows beneath his eyes now, and his usual polished confidence had started cracking around the edges. Good. For 6 years, Etta carried the emotional weight of their marriage while Warren carried the image of it. Now, the image was slipping. He loosened his tie slightly. "We need to handle this carefully." Etta nearly smiled. Carefully. Like betrayal was a PR issue. "What exactly are we handling, Warren?" He sighed heavily. "The situation." "You mean your affair?" His jaw tightened instantly. "You don't have to say it like that." Etta stared at him in disbelief. "How else should I say it?" Warren walked toward the espresso machine, visibly irritated now. "I'm trying to avoid unnecessary conflict." "No," Etta said quietly. "You're trying to avoid consequences." That hit him. She saw it immediately. For the first time since the affair surfaced, Warren looked uncertain around her. Because Etta had stopped crying, and manipulative people panic when their emotional control stops working. He set his coffee down harder than necessary. "You think this is easy for me?" The audacity of the question stunned her. Etta laughed softly under her breath. "That's incredible." Warren crossed his arms defensively. "I didn't plan for things to happen this way." "No," Etta replied. "You just planned everything after. The apartment, the messages, the divorce discussion, the removal strategy." Warren looked away first. Guilt flickered across his face briefly before self-preservation replaced it. "You've changed lately." There it was again. The rewriting of history. Etta leaned back against the counter. "Tell me something, honestly." "What? When did you stop loving me?" Warren froze. Not because the question shocked him, because he had already answered it privately long ago. He rubbed the back of his neck slowly. It wasn't sudden. The truth hurt more than screaming ever could. Not sudden, gradual. Meaning while she decorated Christmas trees, while she cared for Charles after surgery, while she defended Warren to friends, while she still kissed him goodbye every morning. He was quietly leaving her emotionally one piece at a time. Etta swallowed hard. "And instead of telling me you let me keep building a life around you?" Warren's voice softened slightly, then almost pitying. "You would have fallen apart." That sentence changed something permanently. Because suddenly, Etta understood exactly how Warren saw her. Fragile, dependent, manageable, a woman too emotionally attached to survive without him. The saddest part. She used to believe it too. Warren stepped closer carefully. "I know you're hurt." Etta looked up at him. "No. You know I'm inconvenient." His expression hardened immediately again. "There's no point talking when you're like this. Like this." Aware. Before Etta could answer, Warren's phone buzzed on the counter. Claire. Her name lit the screen openly this time. Neither of them moved. Then Warren flipped the phone face down again. Etta noticed something strange in herself. The jealousy was fading. In its place came something colder. Detachment. "You should answer her," Etta said calmly. "I'm working." "Sure." Warren stared at her another second before grabbing his briefcase. "I'll be late tonight." Of course he would. He always ran toward comfort when reality became uncomfortable. At the door, he paused. "Don't make any drastic decisions before we talk." Then he left. Etta stood motionless until his car disappeared down the street. The moment he was gone, she walked upstairs and opened the hidden storage compartment beneath the master closet shelves. Inside, sat a black portfolio containing every property document related to the house. Deed, inheritance records, mortgage structure, insurance agreements. Naomi was right. Legally, Warren had almost no claim to ownership. And somehow, that terrified Etta more than relieved her, because it meant Warren truly believed she knew nothing. She carried the portfolio downstairs just as her phone rang. Naomi Bennett. Etta answered immediately. Good morning. How are you holding up? Naomi asked. Professional voice, calm, sharp. I'm functioning. That's enough for today. Etta sat slowly at the dining room table. I found emails between Vivian and a lawyer. I assumed you might. You assumed men like your husband rarely create these situations alone, Naomi said evenly. Families like the Whitmores operate strategically. The sentence chilled Etta. Strategically. Like she was an obstacle to manage. Naomi continued. Listen carefully. Do not confront them about the property ownership yet. Why? Because right now, they believe you're emotionally vulnerable. Etta stared at the rain outside the windows. I was. Not anymore. Silence stretched briefly. Then Naomi's tone sharpened. Etta, I need you to understand something. Your husband and his mother already made this legal. Etta closed her eyes. Part of her still hated hearing it said out loud. I loved him. I know, Naomi replied softly. But love does not protect women from manipulation. The truth of that settled painfully into Etta's chest. Naomi continued explaining strategy. Document everything, save communication, avoid emotional outbursts, remain inside the property, let them expose themselves. They believe they're controlling the timeline, Naomi said. That's your advantage. After the call ended, Etta spent the afternoon gathering evidence carefully. Every bank statement, every suspicious transfer, every hotel receipt. She created folders on an encrypted drive Naomi recommended. As the hours passed, the emotional devastation slowly transformed into something else. Pattern recognition. Warren's affair wasn't spontaneous passion. It was entitlement. He assumed Etta would stay quiet, Vivian would handle optics. Claire would become the upgraded replacement, and the house would naturally become his. Because everyone in Warren's life treated Etta like supporting infrastructure instead of a human being. Around 4 in the afternoon, Vivian arrived unannounced again. Of course she did. Etta opened the front door calmly. Vivian stepped inside, elegantly removing leather gloves, one finger at a time. I was nearby. Lie. Everything about Vivian was intentional. Etta remained standing. What do you want? Vivian's eyes flickered slightly at the directness. No fake warmth today. Interesting. She glanced around the foyer. You shouldn't isolate yourself. I'm not isolated. Vivian sighed dramatically. Etta, difficult marriages happen every day. Mature women handle these things privately. There it was again. Protect Warren. Protect reputation. Protect appearances. Never Etta. Vivian stepped closer. The worst thing you could do now is become emotional. Etta almost laughed. Because manipulative people always feared emotions from the people they hurt. Not their own cruelty. Just the reaction to it. Vivian lowered her voice gently. Warren's under enormous pressure professionally. Claire simply appeared during a vulnerable time. Etta stared at her. You say her name very comfortably. Vivian's face remained composed. She understands his world. The exact same phrase Warren used. Rehearsed. Aligned, planned. Etta suddenly realized Vivian and Warren had probably discussed her together for months. Evaluated her, managed her, prepared for her removal. Something cold moved through her bloodstream. Vivian touched Etta's arm lightly. You're still young. You'll recover from this eventually. Recover, like she was being dismissed from a hospital stay. Then Vivian delivered the sentence that made Etta finally understand how deeply they underestimated her. You've always depended on Warren emotionally more than you realize. Etta went still. There it was. The core belief beneath all of this. They truly thought she couldn't survive without him, that she would collapse. Beg, leave, quietly. Vivian mistook kindness for weakness because she had never experienced genuine kindness herself. Etta stepped back slowly. I think you should leave now. Vivian blinked. Excuse me, you heard me. For the first time in 6 years, Etta saw genuine surprise cross her mother-in-law's face. Good. Vivian's eyes cooled instantly. I'm trying to help you preserve dignity. No, Etta said softly. You're trying to control the narrative. The silence between them turned sharp. Then Vivian straightened her coat elegantly. You should be very careful what kind of conflict you create here. Threat. Finally honest. Etta met her gaze without flinching. And you should be very careful, assuming I'm powerless. Vivian stared at her another long second before walking toward the front door. But just before leaving, she paused. Richard Gaines will be contacting you Monday morning. Etta's heartbeat slowed. Richard Gaines, the lawyer? Vivian smiled faintly. I suggest you cooperate. Then she walked out into the rain. Leaving Etta standing alone in the foyer of the house everyone planned to take from her. But for the first time, Etta Olson was no longer afraid. Monday morning arrived with cold rain and the kind of silence that made everything feel inevitable. Etta Olson stood alone in the kitchen, wearing cream cashmere lounge pants and a soft grey sweater, while the espresso machine hummed quietly behind her. The house looked beautiful, warm lighting, fresh lilies on the dining table, ocean fog drifting beyond the windows. No one would have guessed a marriage was dying inside it. At 8:12 sharp, the doorbell rang, right on time. Etta inhaled once slowly before walking toward the foyer. She already knew who stood outside. Naomi had warned her the night before. Do not panic, her attorney said. And whatever happens, stay calm. Calm terrifies people who expect you to break. Etta opened the front door. Richard Gaines stood there in a charcoal overcoat holding a leather briefcase beneath one arm. Mid-50s. Expensive haircut. Professional discomfort written all over his face. Behind him, parked near the curb, sat Vivian Whitmore's black Mercedes. Of course she came personally. This wasn't legal business for Vivian. It was theater. Richard offered a restrained nod. Mrs. Whitmore. Etta's voice remained calm. It's Olson. Something flickered briefly across his face. Interesting. May I come in? Before Etta answered, the Mercedes door opened. Vivian stepped out elegantly in ivory wool and Pearl's umbrella held carefully above her head. Warren followed seconds later from the passenger side. He looked pale. Tired. Nervous. Good. Etta's eyes locked onto her husband's face for one long silent moment. He couldn't hold her gaze. Not anymore. Vivian approached first like she belonged there. We're not here to create a scene, she announced immediately. Etta almost smiled. People who said that were always about to create one. Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mrs. Olson, I'm here regarding property occupancy concerns connected to upcoming marital proceedings. Occupancy concerns. What polished language for attempted humiliation. Etta stepped aside calmly. Come in. The three of them entered the foyer. Warren looked visibly uncomfortable standing inside the house now, and Etta noticed the irony instantly. For years, he walked through these rooms with ownership in his posture. Today, he looked like a guest. Richard opened his folder carefully. As you're aware, separation discussions are underway. No.
Etta interrupted softly. An affair is underway. Separation is simply the consequence. Vivian's jaw tightened immediately. Richard continued carefully. Given the financial circumstances involved, it may be appropriate for you to vacate the property voluntarily while a legal distribution is handled. Voluntarily, as if they weren't standing in her house trying to remove her from it. Etta looked directly at Warren. You really thought this would work? He finally spoke, voice low. We wanted to handle this peacefully. Peacefully. After betrayal. After manipulation. After planning her removal behind closed doors. Etta felt something cold and almost amusing settle inside her. Because the more they spoke, the clearer it became. None of them thought she knew anything. Vivian crossed her arms elegantly. This situation has already become emotional enough. The mature thing now would be cooperation. Etta tilted her head slightly. Mature for who Vivian ignored the question. Dragging these things out publicly damages everyone. Translation, protect Warren, protect reputation, protect appearances, never Etta. Richard removed several papers from the folder. If you agree to temporary relocation, we can avoid formal escalation. Etta stared at the documents without touching them. Then slowly she looked at Warren again. And for the first time in 6 years, she saw fear beginning to form behind his eyes. Because something about her calmness felt wrong to him now. He expected tears, not silence. Etta folded her hands lightly in front of her. I have a question. Richard nodded carefully. Of course. Before you came here this morning, did anyone verify ownership records for this property? The room changed instantly. Tiny shift, tiny pause. Richard blinked once. Vivian answered first. Warren owns this house. Etta's eyes moved slowly toward her mother-in-law. No, she said softly. He doesn't. Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. Warren finally looked directly at her. Etta. But she was already walking calmly toward the study. Behind her, she heard Vivian sigh in irritation. This is exactly what I warned you about. She's becoming unstable. Unstable. The favorite word of cruel people when women stopped obeying. Etta opened the study drawer and removed the black portfolio Naomi told her to prepare. Then she walked back into the foyer, carrying it carefully. Richard straightened slightly. Etta handed the portfolio directly to him. Please review page 3 first. Richard hesitated before opening the file. The sound of turning paper filled the silence. Then another page. Then another. Etta watched the exact moment confusion entered his expression. He frowned slightly, adjusted his glasses, looked down again. Vivian noticed immediately. What is it? Richard didn't answer at first. Warren stepped forward now, visibly tense. Richard, the lawyer finally looked up. Mr. Whitmore? Something in his tone made Warren go pale. Richard glanced back down at the paperwork. The property deed lists sole ownership under Miss Etta Olson through inheritance acquisition structure. Silence exploded across the foyer. Vivian stared at him. But Richard turned another page carefully. There appears to be no shared ownership designation attached to the residence itself. Warren looked stunned. Actually, stunned. Like the possibility genuinely never occurred to him. Etta almost pitied him. Almost. Vivian stepped closer sharply. That's impossible. It's fully documented, Richard replied carefully. He continued scanning paperwork, inheritance records, mortgage structures, renovation, investments, tax filings. Every page strengthened Etta's position. Every page destroyed theirs. Warren finally spoke. Why would the house only be under your name? Etta looked at him with quiet disbelief. Because I bought it. The simplicity of the answer hit harder than screaming could have. Warren opened his mouth.
closed it again. For years, he lived inside her labor so comfortably he forgot it existed. Richard cleared his throat awkwardly. There may have been misunderstandings regarding asset assumptions. Misunderstandings? Etta nearly laughed. Vivian's composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous, she snapped. Warren paid for this house too. No, Etta said calmly. He contributed to living expenses. I purchased the property with inherited funds before renovations. Vivian looked horrified. Not because Warren cheated, not because they tried to remove Etta illegally. Because for the first time, they looked foolish. Warren ran a hand through his hair, panic slowly surfacing beneath his polished exterior. You never said anything. Etta stared at him. You never asked. Silence again. Richard closed the portfolio slowly now. His entire demeanor had shifted, more cautious, more formal, toward Etta, because power had changed sides inside the room. I think Richard said carefully, it would be advisable for everyone to pause further action until legal counsel reviews all documentation thoroughly. Translation, this eviction attempt just collapsed. Vivian looked furious. We came here in good faith. Etta finally laughed softly at that. Good faith. The audacity was breathtaking. You hired a lawyer to throw me out of my own house. Vivian's lips pressed tightly together. Warren stepped toward Etta carefully. We can still work this out privately. There it was. Fear. Real fear now. Not fear of losing Etta. Fear of losing control. Etta looked at him steadily. No, she said quietly. You lost the right to private solutions when you started planning my removal. Warren's face hardened slightly. You're making this uglier than it needs to be. Etta's eyes filled suddenly, not with weakness but disbelief. Uglier? Her voice trembled softly now. You cheated on me, lied to me, used my money to build another relationship, then stood outside my front door while your mother tried to evict me from the house I bought. The silence afterward felt enormous. Even Vivian said nothing, because there was nothing left to defend. Etta looked directly at Warren, and for the first time since she met him, she saw him clearly. Not charming, not misunderstood, small. Just a small man, hidden inside expensive suit and family privilege. Then she stepped aside and opened the front door. You should all leave now. Rain poured harder outside. Nobody moved immediately, until Richard finally gathered his papers and closed his briefcase. I'll be in contact, he said carefully, to both parties. Both parties. Not husband and wife anymore. Opposition. Vivian walked out first without another word. Warren lingered. His eyes moved slowly across the house, the staircase, the ocean view, the warmth, the life Etta built. And Etta realized something devastating. He never loved the house because of her. He loved what living inside it said about him. At the doorway, Warren looked back once. Etta, but she interrupted quietly. You tried to throw me out of my own home. The shame on his face lasted only a second. Then he walked into the rain. And for the first time in years, Etta closed the door without feeling abandoned. The house felt different after they left. Quieter. Lighter somehow. As if the walls themselves were relieved the performance had finally ended. Etta Olson stood in the foyer for several long seconds after the front door closed, listening to the rain hammer against the windows while Warren's car disappeared down the coastal road. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear anymore. Adrenaline. Shock. 6 years of emotional control had cracked open in less than 10 minutes. And now the Whitmores knew something they were never supposed to realize. Etta Olson was not powerless. She walked slowly back into the kitchen and poured herself another cup of coffee, though it had already gone cold. The silence felt unfamiliar now. For years, Silence inside this house meant tension, waiting, trying not to upset Warren, trying not to disappoint Vivian, trying to preserve peace. Today, silence felt like breathing room. Her phone buzzed against the marble counter. Naomi Bennett. Etta answered immediately. "Well?" Naomi asked. Etta looked toward the ocean beyond the windows. They had no idea. Naomi laughed softly under her breath. "I figured." Etta sat down slowly. Warren looked shocked. "Because men like your husband don't actually track women's sacrifices," Naomi replied calmly. "They only track outcomes benefiting them." The truth settled heavily into Etta's chest. God. She had spent years shrinking herself beside a man who barely noticed what she carried. Naomi's voice sharpened slightly. "You need to understand something very important right now, Etta." "What?" "The moment power shifted this morning, Warren became dangerous." Etta's stomach tightened. "Dangerous how?" "Not physically," Naomi clarified. "Strategically. Men who are used to controlling narratives panic when they lose control of one. Narrative, image, status. Those things mattered to Warren almost more than oxygen." Naomi continued, "Document every interaction. Avoid private emotional conversations. Communicate carefully. And most importantly, don't underestimate desperation." "He thought this divorce would happen on his terms," Naomi said. "Now it won't." After the call ended, Etta walked slowly through the house. The dining room, the staircase, the living room she spent months redesigning after the first renovation. Every room held memories that suddenly felt contaminated. Not because the house changed, because the truth inside it had. Around noon, Etta began boxing Warren's belongings. Not violently, not dramatically, methodically. Cufflinks, shoes, old Yale sweatshirts, golf jackets. The expensive whiskey glasses he insisted made bourbon taste better. Each item felt strangely disconnected from the man she thought she married. Because betrayal changes memory. It forces you to revisit moments you once loved and ask yourself, was any of it real? Halfway through packing, Etta found an old anniversary card tucked inside Warren's dresser drawer. Year 3 of their marriage. He had written, "You are the safest place I've ever known." Her chest tightened painfully. Maybe he meant it once. That was the tragedy. Sometimes people did love you, and still destroyed you anyway. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Warren. Etta stared at the screen before answering. What silence briefly. Then Warren exhaled. "You didn't have to embarrass my mother like that." Etta almost laughed from pure disbelief. "Your mother brought a lawyer to my house. She thought the property situation was different." "No," Etta said quietly. "She assumed I was weak." Warren's tone hardened immediately. "Stop turning everything into some feminist war." There it was. Dismissal disguised as superiority. Etta leaned against the kitchen counter. "You cheated on me and tried removing me from my own property. I didn't know your name was the only one on the deed." The sentence slipped out too quickly, too honestly. Etta closed her eyes briefly. That was what upset him most. Not hurting her, losing leverage. "You really thought you'd keep the house?" she whispered. Warren stayed silent, which answered everything. Rain battered the windows harder. Finally, Warren spoke again, voice lower now. "Claire isn't moving in." Etta blinked slowly. "Interesting. Not I love you. Not I'm sorry. Just damage control." "She must be disappointed, Etta." "No," she interrupted calmly. "I'm serious. The poor woman probably thought she was inheriting ocean views and custom marble." Warren's breathing changed slightly.
Anger now. Good. For once, let him feel unstable. This isn't who you are. Etta looked around the kitchen slowly. No, she said softly. This is who I become when I stop begging to be respected. Silence. Then Warren tried a different strategy. Gentleness. Manipulative men always returned to gentleness when authority stopped working. You know, I never wanted to hurt you. That almost destroyed her. Because a part of Etta still loved him enough to want to believe it. But intention meant nothing beside repeated cruelty. You already did, she whispered. Then she hung up. Her hands shook afterward, not because she regretted it, because every conversation with Warren felt like emotional surgery now. Cutting away illusion hurt. By late afternoon, Warren's things had packed neatly near the front hallway. Etta stared at the boxes quietly. 6 years reduced to cardboard. The doorbell rang around 5. When Etta opened the door, she found Claire Holloway standing there. For one suspended second, neither woman spoke. Claire looked polished, even in the rain camel coat perfect makeup. Dark blonde hair pinned elegantly back. But up close, she also looked nervous. Human. Not the fantasy villain Etta imagined during sleepless nights. Claire swallowed carefully. I know this is inappropriate. Etta folded her arms. That's a pattern lately. Claire flinched slightly. Good. She should. I needed to know if Warren was okay. There it was. Not guilt. Concern for him. Etta studied her quietly. Did he tell you they tried to evict me this morning? Claire's face changed instantly. What interesting. So Warren hadn't mentioned that part. He said there was conflict about the house. Etta almost laughed again. Conflict. What elegant language wealthy people used for cruelty. Claire looked genuinely confused now. He told me the property belonged to both of you. No, Etta replied calmly. He told you what benefited him. The silence between them thickened. Claire's eyes drifted past Etta into the house, and Etta suddenly realized something almost heartbreaking. Claire admired this life too. The house, the status, the image of Warren Whitmore. She had fallen for the same performance Etta once did. Claire looked back at her carefully. He said your marriage was over long before me. Pain moved sharply through Etta's chest despite everything. Because maybe emotionally, Warren truly had left long ago. But instead of honesty, he chose betrayal. That doesn't excuse cheating, Etta said quietly. Claire looked ashamed for the first time. No, she admitted softly. It doesn't. Rain poured harder outside. Neither woman moved. Finally, Claire asked the question she probably came there for. Does Warren still want the divorce? Etta stared at her. Not because the question hurt, because the answer suddenly felt obvious. Warren didn't know what he wanted anymore. Men, like Warren, only felt certainty while they controlled every variable. Now, the equation changed. Claire no longer looked like an exciting secret. Etta no longer looked weak. And the house he planned to keep, gone. Etta stepped back slowly from the doorway. You should ask him that yourself. Then she closed the door gently. Not angrily, just finished. That night, Etta carried the last box of Warren's belongings into the garage. As she turned to go back inside, headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. Warren's car. He stepped out slowly into the rain, staring at the stacked boxes visible through the open garage. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then finally, you packed my things. Etta met his eyes calmly. You said this marriage was already over. The look on Warren's face shifted then. Not heartbreak, not remorse, fear. Real fear. Because for the first time since Etta met him,
She looked like a woman fully capable of leaving him behind. And suddenly Warren Whitmore no longer felt powerful at all. Warren Whitmore stared at the boxes in the garage like he didn't recognize his own life anymore. Rain soaked through his suit jacket while a water dripped from his hair onto the concrete floor. Behind him, the headlights of his black BMW cut pale streaks through the darkness. Etta stood near the doorway leading back into the house, arms folded tightly across her chest. For years this man came home carrying confidence like armor. Tonight he looked displaced, human, and somehow that hurt more than it satisfied her. "You're serious?" Warren said finally. Etta almost smiled at the absurdity of the statement. "You brought a lawyer to remove me from my house. That wasn't my idea." The answer came too fast, too defensive. Etta tilted her head slightly. "But you stood there." Warren looked away. Silence settled heavily between them while rain hammered the roof overhead. For a brief moment, Etta remembered another rainy night years earlier, when Warren carried her laughing through this same garage after they got caught in a storm, returning from dinner in the city. Back then she thought she was loved. Now she wondered how many memories survive once trust dies. Warren stepped closer carefully. "Can we not do this in front of strangers?" Etta blinked. "Strangers?" He gestured toward neighboring houses. "People are watching." There it was again. Image. Always image first. Even now. Etta laughed softly under her breath. "My marriage collapsed, Warren. I genuinely don't care about the neighbors." The words unsettled him visibly. Because emotional freedom terrified men who relied on shame for control. Warren lowered his voice. "I made mistakes. Mistakes. Such a clean little word for calculated betrayal." Etta stared at him steadily. "You planned a future with another woman. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Again, not regret. Just disappointment at losing control of the timeline. Etta suddenly felt exhausted beyond language. She no longer wanted explanations. Explanations implied confusion. There was no confusion anymore. Only truth. "I spoke with Naomi Bennett today," she said calmly. Warren's face changed immediately. "You hired Naomi? Interesting." That scared him more than her tears ever did. "She's representing me." Warren ran a hand over his face slowly. "Etta, hiring someone like Naomi escalates things." "No," Etta replied quietly. "Your affair escalated things." The rain intensified outside. For several long seconds, Warren said nothing. Then his voice softened dangerously. "You know, I never cared about money." Etta stared at him in disbelief so profound it almost made her laugh again. Not cared about money. His entire identity revolved around status, prestige, power, luxury. Even Claire fit into that world aesthetically. Polished, corporate, impressive. "You cared enough to assume you owned my house." Warren's jaw tightened. "I contributed." "You lived there." The silence that followed cut sharply between them. Then Warren said something that finally exposed the truth underneath everything. "You're trying to punish me." Etta felt her heartbeat slow. Punish. As if protecting herself after betrayal was cruelty. As if consequences were abuse. "No," she whispered. "I'm trying to stop disappearing." For the first time all night, Warren looked genuinely shaken. Because somewhere beneath his entitlement, he understood she was right. Etta had spent years dissolving herself around his needs. Now she was becoming visible again. And visibility made manipulation harder. His phone buzzed suddenly in his pocket. Claire. Etta knew before he even checked. Warren looked at the screen briefly, then silenced it. Interesting. A week ago, he would have answered immediately. Now his entire world was shifting beneath him. "You should go," Etta said quietly. Warren looked up. "This is still my home."
The sentence hung in the air. Etta walked slowly toward him until only a few feet separated them. "No," she said softly. "It's the place you lived while I built your life for you." Something about the calmness in her voice finally broke through his composure. "Why are you acting like I'm some monster?" he snapped suddenly. There he was. The real Warren. Not charming, not polished, just angry that accountability existed. "You lied to me for months," Etta replied. "What exactly would you prefer to be called, Warren?" Exhaled sharply and looked away again. Then quietly, "I was unhappy." Pain moved through Etta despite herself. Because once upon a time, that sentence alone would have destroyed her. Now, it mostly revealed cowardice. "You could have told me. You wouldn't have understood." Etta almost laughed again. The arrogance, as if betrayal required sophistication, as if honesty was impossible. "No," she said softly. "You just didn't want to lose comfort while searching for excitement." The accuracy of that made Warren flinch. Good. He should. Finally, he grabbed one of the boxes from the garage floor. "So that's it?" Etta looked at him for a long moment. "No, that's 6 years." Then she turned and walked back into the house. Behind her, she heard nothing except rain and cardboard shifting, and somehow, that silence felt like the actual end of her marriage. The next morning, Naomi Bennett's office overlooked downtown Stamford through walls of glass and steel. Everything about the space felt precise, controlled, dangerously intelligent. Naomi herself matched the office perfectly. Sharp navy suit, silver watch, calm eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She studied documents spread across the conference table, while Etta sat across from her, clutching coffee she barely touched. "The property issue gives you substantial leverage," Naomi said calmly. "But there are other concerns." Etta's stomach tightened. Naomi slid several printed statements across the table. "I reviewed the financial records you sent." Etta looked down slowly. Luxury hotels, flights, corporate expense reimbursements, charges Warren submitted through firm accounts. Naomi tapped one line item carefully. "These weekends with Claire?" Etta nodded faintly. "They were billed through Warren's client entertainment budget." Etta blinked slowly. "What does that mean?" "It means your husband may have used company resources to finance an extramarital relationship." The room suddenly felt colder. Naomi leaned back slightly. "And if that's true, this becomes more than a divorce problem." Etta stared at the paperwork in disbelief. Would he really risk that Naomi's expression remained calm? Powerful men often confuse privilege with immunity. The sentence settled heavily into Etta's chest. Because Warren never truly believed consequences applied to him. Not emotionally, not professionally, not socially. Naomi continued reviewing records. "There's more." Etta looked up. "Claire Holloway appears connected to one of Warren's major clients through her family's investment network." Etta frowned slightly. "I don't understand. It creates ethical concerns, especially if personal relationships influence business access." A pulse of anxiety moved through Etta. This could destroy his career. Naomi met her eyes evenly. "Your husband made choices fully aware of risk." The truth of that hurt more than she expected. Because even now, part of Etta wanted Warren protected. Not because he deserved it. Because she once loved him deeply enough to build a life around his success. Naomi's voice softened slightly. "You are not responsible for saving a man who was comfortable destroying you." Etta looked down at her hands. God. How many years had she spent emotionally managing everyone except herself, Vivian's moods? Warren's stress, family tension, social expectations. Meanwhile, nobody asked if Etta Olson was okay. Naomi closed the folder carefully. "There's something else you need to prepare for." "What warrants panic?" Etta looked up slowly.
When men like your husband lose control of money, image, and admiration simultaneously, they become unpredictable emotionally. The sentence lingered in the air ominously. Then Naomi added quietly, and based on these records, his world is about to start collapsing very quickly. As if summoned by the warning, Etta's phone buzzed against the conference table. Warren, again. But this time, before Etta could answer, another call came through immediately afterward. Gregory Hale, senior managing partner at Warren's law firm. Etta stared at the name, while a cold feeling spread slowly through her chest. Something had already begun. Etta stared at Gregory Hale's name glowing across her phone screen, while Naomi Bennett watched her carefully from across the conference table. For one suspended second, nobody moved. Then Naomi spoke quietly. "Answer it." Etta swallowed hard and accepted the call. "Mr. Hale Gregory." Hale's voice sounded older than usual. Controlled. Professional. But strained beneath the surface. "Mrs. Whitmore Olson." Etta corrected automatically. A brief silence followed. "Right," he said carefully. "I apologize." Etta's stomach tightened. Powerful men only apologized when something serious was happening. Gregory lowered his voice. "I won't take much of your time. I simply wanted to inform you that the firm has opened an internal review involving Warren." Etta closed her eyes briefly. It had started. "What kind of review?" "We identified irregularities connected to expense allocations and client entertainment disclosures." Corporate language again. Everything devastating always arrived wrapped in polished vocabulary. Etta looked toward Naomi instinctively. Naomi remained perfectly calm. Gregory continued carefully. "Your name appeared in several records related to residential assets and reimbursement inconsistencies. We may need clarification regarding property ownership." Etta understood immediately. The house. Warren likely presented himself internally as primary owner. Image mattered at the firm too. Successful men were expected to display successful lives. And Warren had built his entire reputation using pieces of Etta's labor. "I understand," she replied quietly. Gregory hesitated briefly before speaking again. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." The sincerity in his voice startled her. Then the call ended. Silence filled Naomi's office. Etta stared down at the phone in her hand. "It's happening fast." Naomi nodded once. "Because Warren got sloppy." Etta looked up. "He's smart." "Yes," Naomi replied evenly. "But arrogant people often mistake intelligence for invincibility." The sentence echoed inside Etta painfully. Because that described Warren perfectly. He never imagined consequences because consequences had rarely touched him before. Not with Vivian smoothing social problems behind the scenes. Not with privilege cushioning every mistake. Not with Etta quietly fixing emotional damage before anyone noticed cracks. Naomi closed the folder in front of her. He built a life assuming women would absorb fallout for him. The truth of that nearly took Etta's breath away. Claire absorbed loneliness. Etta absorbed betrayal. Vivian absorbed accountability. And Warren, he absorbed admiration. Naomi stood and walked toward the office windows overlooking the city skyline. "You know what men like your husband fear most?" Etta shook her head slightly. "Exposure." The word settled heavily between them. "Not losing love." Naomi continued. "Not even losing marriage. Exposure. Being seen clearly." Etta looked down slowly at her wedding ring. For years, she protected Warren's image, even from herself. Now the image was collapsing everywhere simultaneously. And somehow, instead of satisfaction, she mostly felt grief. By late afternoon, Warren's world had already begun unraveling publicly inside the firm. Etta learned that from Lindsay Whitmore. Ironically, Her phone buzzed while she sat alone at a cafe near Naomi's office, trying unsuccessfully to drink tea. Lindsay rarely called her directly, which meant drama had reached emergency levels. Etta answered carefully. But Lindsay sounded breathless. "What the hell is happening?" Etta stared through the cafe window. "That's a broad question." "Gregory Hale suspended Warren from client meetings today." Etta felt her chest tighten despite herself. Suspended. Real. This was becoming real. Lindsay continued rapidly. "Mom is freaking out. Warren says someone reported financial misconduct. Someone. As if Warren wasn't the one submitting the expenses himself." Etta remained quiet. Lindsay lowered her voice. "Did you do something?" There it was. Not did Warren betray you. Not are you okay. Only did you threaten his career. Etta suddenly realized something deeply painful. The Whitmores never truly viewed Warren as responsible for his own actions. They viewed women as environmental factors influencing him. Good women protected him. Bad women ruined him. Etta leaned back slowly in her chair. "I didn't make Warren cheat. That's not what I meant. I didn't make him misuse company money either." Silence. Then Lindsay spoke carefully. "He says Claire pressured him." Etta laughed softly in disbelief. "Of course. Someone else again. Always someone else." "He's 38 years old, Lindsay. That doesn't mean people can't manipulate him." The irony was so sharp, Etta almost admired it. Warren manipulated everyone around him emotionally for years, yet somehow remained the victim in his family's narrative. Lindsay sighed heavily. "Mom says you're trying to destroy him because you're hurt." Etta looked down at the untouched tea in front of her. "No," she whispered. "I'm just not protecting him anymore." That shut Lindsay up completely, because deep down, they all knew it was true. For years, Etta acted like emotional insulation around Warren's life. Now reality touched him directly for the first time, and he didn't know how to survive it. That evening, Etta returned home just before sunset. The house felt painfully quiet again, but not empty, not anymore. For the first time in years, the silence belonged to her. She changed into comfortable clothes and wandered slowly through the kitchen while golden evening light spilled across marble counters. Then she noticed something strange. One of Warren's whiskey glasses sat in the sink, freshly used. Her heartbeat slowed. He had been there, without permission. Anger rose immediately, not explosive anger, violation. Etta walked toward the living room carefully. Nothing looked disturbed. But then she heard movement upstairs. Footsteps. Warren emerged moments later from the hallway leading to the master bedroom. He froze when he saw her. For a second, they simply stared at each other across the room. He looked terrible. Tie loosened, eyes bloodshot, corporate polish finally cracking apart. "What are you doing here?" Etta asked coldly. Warren ran a hand through his hair. "I still have things here. You could have contacted me. I didn't think I needed permission." The entitlement in that sentence instantly reignited her anger. "You lost access to this house when you tried throwing me out of it." Warren looked exhausted suddenly. "I didn't come to fight." "No," Etta replied quietly. "You came because your life is collapsing." That hit him immediately. His jaw tightened hard. "You think this is funny?" Etta stared at him. Funny God. Nothing about this felt funny. "I think you're finally experiencing consequences." Warren turned away briefly, visibly trying to regain composure. The firm overreacted. "Did they? I didn't steal money. You used company resources to finance your affair." His face darkened. "Claire told you that? Interesting." So now he suspected Claire too. The cracks were spreading everywhere. Etta crossed her arms. "You're not angry you betrayed me. You're angry you got caught." Warren stepped closer sharply. You have no idea what pressure I'm under right now. There it is, Etta whispered. What, you still think you're the victim? Silence slammed into the room. Warren looked at her like he barely recognized her anymore. Maybe he didn't, because this version of Etta no longer rearranged reality to protect his ego. He laughed bitterly under his breath. You know what, Claire was right about one thing. Pain flickered instinctively through Etta before she could stop it. Warren continued. You've become impossible to talk to. There it was again. Not you deserve honesty. Not I hurt you. Just you became inconvenient once you stopped tolerating disrespect. Etta looked at him calmly. No, Warren. I became impossible to control. For the first time since she met him, Warren had absolutely no response. His phone buzzed suddenly in his pocket. Claire, again. Etta saw the name flash across the screen before he silenced it. Interesting, very interesting, because Warren no longer looked excited when Claire called. He looked trapped, like the fantasy had started rotting under real-world consequences. Etta noticed immediately. And for the first time she realized Claire Holloway was beginning to understand exactly who Warren Whitmore really was too. 3 days later, Vivian Whitmore arrived at the house alone. No lawyer, no Warren, no polished performance audience. Just Vivian standing on the front porch beneath a pale gray sky, gripping her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles looked almost white. Etta nearly didn't open the door. But curiosity won. When she stepped into the foyer, Vivian looked different somehow. Still elegant, still controlled, but thinner around the edges. As if the collapse of Warren's carefully constructed life had finally begun reaching her too. May I come in? Vivian asked quietly. Etta hesitated before stepping aside. Vivian entered slowly, eyes drifting across the house. The house she once treated like her son's accomplishment. The house she tried to remove Etta from. Funny how differently people looked at things once power shifted. Etta remained standing. What do you want? Vivian exhaled carefully. Warren isn't doing well. There it was, immediately. Now, how are you not? I'm sorry, always Warren. Etta folded her arms loosely, and Vivian's expression tightened slightly. He's under enormous pressure. Etta almost laughed. Pressure. Such a polite word for consequences. Vivian continued carefully. The investigation at the firm is becoming serious. I know. Claire ended things. Something flickered painfully through Etta despite herself. Not jealousy. Just exhaustion. The whole situation felt rotten now. Warren destroyed a marriage for a fantasy that collapsed the moment real life touched it. Vivian sat slowly on the edge of the cream-colored sofa. For several long seconds, she simply stared down at her hands. Then finally, I think we both know, Warren made mistakes. Mistakes again. Everyone kept using tiny words for enormous betrayals. Etta leaned lightly against the fireplace. He cheated on me. Vivian looked up sharply. Lower your voice. The response was so automatic, Etta almost smiled. Even now, still protecting appearances. There's nobody here, Etta said quietly. Vivian pressed her lips together. You don't need to be cruel, cruel. Etta actually laughed this time. A soft, disbelieving sound. You hired a lawyer to evict me from my own house. Vivian flinched slightly. Interesting. Perhaps shame did exist somewhere underneath all that polished cruelty after all. We misunderstood the ownership situation. No, Etta replied calmly. You assumed I had nothing. Silence. Vivian looked away first. The room felt heavy with years of unspoken resentment. Finally, Vivian stood and walked slowly toward the windows overlooking the ocean. When Warren met you, she said quietly, I thought you were temporary. The honesty startled Etta more than insults ever had.
Vivian continued staring outside. You were kind, soft-spoken, emotional. Women like that don't survive in families like ours. Families like ours. Meaning wealthy, strategic, transactional. Etta watched her carefully. And Claire does. Vivian hesitated. Yes. The answer hurt less than it should have. Because Etta finally understood something important. Vivian didn't respect cruelty because it was good. She respected it because it resembled power. Etta moved closer slowly. You know what's sad? Vivian turned slightly toward her. For years I thought if I loved your son enough, your family would eventually love me too. Something unreadable crossed Vivian's face. You wanted acceptance too badly. The sentence landed brutally because it was true. God. It was true. Etta spent years performing emotional labor for people who never intended to embrace her. Cooking, hosting, supporting, shrinking, trying endlessly to earn warmth from emotionally cold people. Vivian sighed softly. You made Warren comfortable. Comfortable. Not happy. Not fulfilled. Useful. Etta swallowed hard. And Claire makes him what excited Vivian look down briefly. For a while. There it was. The quiet truth beneath affairs. Not profound love. Escape. Ego. Novelty. Temporary validation. And Warren threw away 6 years chasing it. Vivian sat back down, slowly looking suddenly older than Etta had ever seen her. Warren is falling apart. Something dangerous moved through Etta's chest then. Not satisfaction, exactly. Recognition. Because for years, she fell apart quietly, while Warren continued functioning comfortably. Now it was his turn. Vivian's voice softened. He barely sleeps. Gregory Hale, remove him from 2 major accounts. There are rumors partnership consideration is gone permanently. Etta looked away toward the kitchen. Once upon a time, hearing that would have devastated her. Now it mostly made her tired. Vivian studied her carefully. You really aren't going to help him? Not a question, an accusation. Etta laughed softly under her breath. Help him? He's your husband. No, Etta replied quietly. He's a man who betrayed me. The room fell silent again. Then Vivian finally said the thing that exposed everything underneath this family dynamic. He thought you'd never leave. Etta froze. Vivian's eyes met hers directly now. He said you loved him too much. Pain moved sharply through Etta's body despite everything. Because he was right. She had loved Warren too much. More than herself. Vivian continued quietly. He said you needed him. The words settled like ice beneath Etta's skin. Needed him. Not loved him. Needed. Dependency. Control. That was how Warren saw her. A loyal, emotional structure that would remain standing no matter how poorly he treated it. Etta blinked rapidly. He actually said that Vivian nodded once. He told me Etta will never leave me. She has nowhere else to go. The humiliation of that sentence almost took Etta's breath away. Not because it was cruel, because once upon a time she might have proven him right. Years ago, she would have forgiven anything just to keep the marriage alive. Cheating, lies, humiliation, because she confused endurance with love. Tears burned suddenly behind her eyes. Vivian noticed immediately, and instinctively moved toward comfort for the first time in 6 years. Etta. But Etta stepped back. No. Vivian stopped. Etta wiped her face quickly, anger mixing painfully with grief. You know what's unbelievable? She whispered. I spent years thinking your son was emotionally distant because he was stressed or overwhelmed or damaged somehow. Her voice shook now, but he wasn't confused. He simply believed I would tolerate anything. Silence. Vivian had no response, because there wasn't one. Etta looked around the living room slowly. The furniture she chose, the art she hung, the home she built while Warren slowly detached emotionally, piece by piece. "He stopped loving me a long time ago," she whispered. Vivian's expression shifted unexpectedly then. Not pity. Recognition. And maybe for the first time, Vivian actually saw the devastation clearly. "He loved being loved by you," Vivian admitted quietly. The honesty hit harder than any lie, because deep down, Etta knew that was true too. Warren loved what she gave him: stability, admiration, emotional safety, forgiveness, loyalty. But loving someone's devotion was not the same as loving them. Vivian picked up her handbag slowly. "He's still hoping this can be fixed." Etta looked at her in disbelief. After everything. But then she remembered Warren didn't actually understand consequences emotionally. He understood inconvenience, loss of image, loss of comfort, not irreversible damage. Vivian moved toward the front door, then paused. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I underestimated you." Etta stared at her. No apology. Of course not. Women like Vivian rarely apologize sincerely because apology required vulnerability. But still, it was the closest thing to honesty Etta had ever received from her. Vivian opened the door slowly. Then Etta spoke one final time. "He underestimated me too." Vivian turned slightly. Etta's eyes filled again, but this time there was steel beneath the sadness. And that was his biggest mistake. Vivian left without another word. The front door closed softly behind her. And for the first time since the affair began, Etta Olson no longer felt abandoned. She felt awake. The next morning, Etta Olson woke before sunrise with Vivian's words still echoing painfully in her head. "He said you needed him." She lay motionless beneath soft linen sheets, staring at the pale ceiling, while ocean light slowly crept through the windows. Needed him, not loved him, not cherished him, needed. Like dependence was the foundation of their marriage, instead of intimacy. Etta closed her eyes tightly. The worst part wasn't Warren cheating. It was realizing how long he had quietly looked down on her while accepting everything she gave him. Her phone buzzed softly on the nightstand. "Naomi." Etta answered immediately. "You sound exhausted," Naomi said gently. "I don't think I've emotionally caught up to any of this yet. That's normal." Etta sat up slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "No," she whispered. "I think I'm grieving someone who probably never existed." Silence settled briefly between them. Then Naomi asked carefully, "Did Vivian come by yesterday?" Etta almost smiled bitterly. "How did you know families like the Whitmores always try emotional negotiation once legal leverage weakens?" Of course they did. Because manipulation was easier than accountability. Etta rubbed her forehead slowly. She said Warren thought I'd never leave him. Naomi's voice sharpened slightly. "That belief is very common among emotionally entitled men." The sentence stung because it felt painfully accurate. Warren never saw Etta's loyalty as a gift. He saw it as permanence, guaranteed devotion, something he could neglect endlessly without losing. Etta walked downstairs slowly, while holding the phone against her ear. The house felt too quiet again, too large. Every room carried echoes now. Naomi continued, "How are you holding up emotionally?" Etta stared toward the dining room, where years of family dinners once took place. "I keep replaying everything. That's trauma processing." Etta leaned against the kitchen counter. "No, It's worse than that. What do you mean? She swallowed hard. I keep realizing how many signs I ignored. The delayed children conversations, the emotional distance, the constant criticism from Vivian that Warren never stopped, the loneliness. God, the loneliness. For years, Etta told herself marriage simply became quieter over time, more mature, less romantic. But deep down, she knew something disappeared long before Claire entered the picture. Naomi's voice softened. You're not stupid for loving someone. Tears burned unexpectedly behind Etta's eyes. Because kindness always sounded shocking after prolonged emotional neglect. I wanted children with him, she whispered. The admission cracked something open inside her chest. Not just heartbreak. Mourning. Mourning the future she built entire pieces of herself around. Warren always postponed the conversation. After the promotion, after the trial, after the move, after things settled down, there was always another reason to wait. And Etta waited because she believed partnership required patience. Now she wondered if Warren delayed children because he already knew he wanted another life someday. The thought devastated her. Naomi interrupted her, spiraling gently. Etta, yet you need to stop blaming yourself for his deception. But deception felt personal, intimate, tailored, because Warren didn't just lie once. He lied daily through omission, through silence, through pretending. After the call ended, Etta wandered into the spare bedroom she once planned to turn into a nursery. The room still held paint samples tucked inside the closet. Soft sage green, warm cream. She remembered standing in this exact space 2 years earlier while Warren wrapped his arms around her waist. One day, he whispered into her hair. She almost collapsed from the memory, because maybe he already belonged emotionally to someone else even then. A knock at the front door startled her from the thought. Etta glanced at the clock. 10:17 a.m. Not Warren. He never knocked. When she opened the door, Charles Whitmore stood outside alone. Etta blinked in surprise. Charles looked uncomfortable in a dark wool coat, hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. Hello, Etta. She stepped aside automatically. Come in? Charles entered, slowly glancing around the house like he hadn't really looked at it before. Maybe he hadn't. Men like Charles spent entire lives moving through spaces women emotionally maintained without ever noticing the labor involved. Etta offered coffee. He nodded gratefully. They sat quietly in the kitchen for several moments before Charles finally spoke. I'm not very good at these conversations. That almost made Etta laugh. Nobody in the Whitmore family was. Not emotionally honest ones anyway. Charles wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. Vivian told me what happened yesterday. Etta remained silent. He sighed heavily. She shouldn't have handled things that way. No defense. Interesting. Etta studied him carefully. You knew about Claire? Charles looked ashamed immediately. I suspected. Pain moved sharply through her again. How long? A while, of course. Everyone knew, except the woman being betrayed. Charles looked older today. Not powerful businessman, older, tired older, regret older. I should have said something. Etta stared down into her coffee quietly. Yes, she whispered. The honesty seemed to hurt him. Good. Charles rubbed his jaw slowly. Warren gets a lot of himself from Vivian. The sentence carried decades inside it. Marriage, control, emotional distance, silence. Etta looked up carefully. Did you love her? Charles blinked in surprise. Vivian Etta nodded. He gave a tired smile. In our own way? Their own way. What a tragic phrase. Charles stared toward the windows. Your mother-in-law believes survival matters more than tenderness.
Etta absorbed that quietly. Because suddenly Vivian made more sense. Women who survived emotionally cold environments often mistook vulnerability for weakness. And Warren learned that same lesson growing up. Charles looked back at Etta carefully. But you loved differently. The tears came unexpectedly then. Fast. Sharp. Because nobody had acknowledged her love kindly in a very long time. Charles continued softly. You made this house feel alive. God. That hurt more than cruelty. Because after weeks of manipulation and betrayal, simple recognition almost shattered her. Etta wiped her face quickly. I wasn't enough for him. Charles looked genuinely saddened by that. No, he said quietly. You were too safe for a man addicted to admiration. The sentence stunned her. Safe. Not boring. Not weak. Safe. And suddenly, Etta understood something heartbreaking. Warren didn't chase Claire because Claire was better. He chased the version of himself he became around someone new, desired, important, interesting again. Affairs often had less to do with love than ego resurrection. Charles stood slowly. Vivian won't admit it, he said carefully. But she's frightened. Of what? That Warren destroyed the best thing in his life. The words settled painfully into Etta's chest. Because part of her still wanted Warren to realize that someday, even if she no longer wanted him back. Charles moved toward the door slowly, then paused. There's something else you should know. Etta looked up. He hesitated briefly before speaking. Vivian believes Claire may be pregnant. The world stopped, completely. Etta stared at him while cold spread through her body, inch by inch. Pregnant. No. No. Charles immediately looked regretful. I shouldn't have said that. But it was too late. The damage was already done. Every delayed conversation about children suddenly came rushing back violently. Every excuse, every postponed plan, every not yet, while he built another future somewhere else. Etta gripped the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. Charles stepped forward instinctively, Etta. But she stepped back. Breathing became difficult suddenly. Pregnant. Claire pregnant. Warren creating the family Etta begged for with someone else. The pain was so sharp it almost felt unreal. Charles looked horrified now. I'm sorry. Etta barely heard him, because one devastating thought kept repeating inside her mind. Maybe Warren didn't just stop loving her. Maybe he replaced her completely. That evening, long after Charles left, Etta sat alone in the dark living room, staring at nothing. Then her phone buzzed softly beside her. Unknown number. She almost ignored it. Almost. But something in her chest tightened instinctively before she answered. Hello? Silence briefly. Then a female voice spoke quietly. Etta Claire Holloway. And she sounded like she had been crying. There's something you deserve to know. Etta almost hung up the moment she heard Claire Holloway's voice. For several long seconds, she said nothing. Neither did Claire. Only the faint sound of breathing existed between them. Then Claire spoke again, quieter this time. Please don't hang up. Etta stared out at the dark ocean beyond the living room windows. Rain still moved softly across the glass, blurring the lights along the shoreline. What do you want? Claire inhaled shakily. To tell you the truth, the irony nearly made Etta laugh. Truth. After weeks of lies from everyone around her, the word sounded almost foreign. Etta closed her eyes briefly. Are you pregnant? Silence. Long enough to hurt? Then Claire answered softly. No. Etta froze. What, I'm not pregnant? The room tilted emotionally. Etta gripped the edge of the couch tightly. But Vivian said, I know what Vivian said. Claire sounded exhausted now. And it isn't true. For several seconds, Etta genuinely couldn't process the information. No baby. No secret family Warren planned behind her back. Just another manipulation. Another cruelty. Another emotional weapon. Anger moved through her chest so sharply she almost felt dizzy. She lied. Etta whispered. Yes. Claire's voice cracked slightly. She told Warren I might be pregnant after I missed one dinner because I had the flu. Then somehow it became this entire narrative. Etta pressed trembling fingers against her forehead. God. Vivian weaponized motherhood itself. Just to destabilize her emotionally. The realization made something inside Etta go cold. Not heartbroken. Done. Claire spoke carefully again. I think she believed it would push the divorce faster. Divorce. Like Etta's life was a negotiation strategy. Etta stood slowly and walked toward the kitchen because sitting still suddenly felt impossible. Why are you telling me this? Another pause. Then finally, because Warren lied to both of us. That sentence settled heavily between them. Etta leaned against the kitchen counter. How? Claire laughed bitterly under her breath. He told me your marriage was emotionally dead years ago. Pain flickered instinctively through Etta despite everything. Claire continued. He said you stayed because you were financially dependent and afraid of being alone. There it was again. The narrative Warren built around her. Weak, fragile, dependent. Etta stared silently at the marble floor while humiliation burned through her chest. Claire's voice softened. I believed him. With the question came out harsher than intended. Claire didn't react defensively. Because men like Warren are very convincing when they want admiration. True. Painfully true. Claire sighed shakily. I thought I was falling in love with someone trapped in a sad marriage. Etta almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the story sounded so embarrassingly familiar. Warren always positioned himself as misunderstood, emotionally burdened, unappreciated. Women like Etta and Claire responded to woundedness because empathy was in their nature, and Warren knew that. Claire continued quietly. I didn't know about the house either. Of course you didn't. He said he bought it himself. Etta closed her eyes. There it was again. Her labor erased completely. Claire sounded genuinely ashamed now. When I came to the house that day, I realized something was wrong immediately. The day you showed up asking if Warren still wanted the divorce. Yes. Etta remembered Claire standing in the rain, looking uncertain for the first time. Human, not victorious. Claire exhaled slowly. You looked nothing like the woman he described. What woman was that? Silence briefly. Then carefully emotionally unstable, dependent, passive-aggressive, manipulative. Etta laughed softly in disbelief. Amazing. Warren described his own behavior and pasted it onto her. Claire continued. He said you controlled him emotionally whenever he tried to leave. The cruelty of that almost impressed Etta. Because Warren wasn't just lying, he was rewriting reality completely. Etta walked slowly back toward the living room. Why call me now? Claire hesitated. Then because I ended things tonight. Etta stopped moving. What I left. Something complicated moved through Etta's chest. Not satisfaction exactly, just inevitability. Claire sounded hollow now. I found out he'd been messaging another woman at the firm. Etta blinked slowly. Another woman? Of course. Claire gave a broken laugh. I guess I shouldn't be shocked, right? No. She shouldn't. Because once deception becomes normalized, betrayal rarely stays contained to one person.
Etta sat down carefully on the couch again. Did you love him? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Claire went quiet. Then softly, I loved who he pretended to be. That answer hurt because Etta understood it perfectly. Warren Whitmore specialized in emotional mirroring. He became whoever people needed at first, ambitious, misunderstood, vulnerable, charming, emotionally trapped, until eventually the performance became impossible to maintain. Claire's voice trembled now. I'm sorry, Etta. The sincerity in it almost made Etta cry. Because oddly enough, Claire sounded more remorseful than Warren ever had. You didn't owe me loyalty, Etta whispered. Claire inhaled sharply. But I still helped hurt you. Silence settled between them again. Then Etta said something she never imagined herself saying. He hurt you too. Claire started crying quietly after that. Not dramatic sobbing, just exhaustion. The sound of someone realizing they destroyed part of their life for a fantasy that never existed. After several moments, Claire spoke again. There's more. Etta's stomach tightened instinctively. What I have copies of messages and financial records Warren asked me to delete. Etta sat up straighter immediately. Why would he ask that? Because Gregory Hale started asking questions. Corporate panic. Evidence destruction. Naomi would lose her mind over this. Claire continued. I didn't delete them. Etta's pulse quickened. Why not? Because part of me knew someday I'd need proof too. The sentence lingered heavily. Women surviving the same man in different ways. Claire lowered her voice. If you want them, they're yours. Etta stared into the darkness beyond the windows. This was the moment. The real shift. Not emotional anymore. Strategic. Warren's carefully constructed world was unraveling from every direction simultaneously. And for the first time, Etta realized something profound. She no longer wanted revenge. She wanted truth exposed. Claire spoke carefully. I know you probably hate me. Etta thought about it honestly. Weeks ago? Yes. Now? No. Because hatred required emotional attachment, and Etta was finally beginning to see the entire structure clearly. Warren manipulated women differently, depending on what they needed emotionally. Etta needed love. Claire needed excitement. Vivian needed control. And Warren fed each of them exactly enough illusion to maintain power. No, Etta said softly. I don't hate you. Claire sounded stunned. Really, I think we both believed someone who didn't deserve it. The honesty of that sat painfully between them. Claire wiped her nose softly. He used to say something about you all the time. Etta's chest tightened despite herself. But Claire hesitated. Then quietly, he said you were too weak to survive without him. The sentence landed differently now. Not devastating, revealing. Because Warren never actually saw Etta clearly. He saw the version of her that benefited him most. Loyal, forgiving, endlessly available. But people often mistake kindness for dependency. And the moment kind women stop sacrificing themselves, everything changes. Etta stood and walked slowly toward the hallway mirror. For a long moment, she simply looked at herself. Tired eyes, healing anger, grief, strength slowly returning. Then she spoke softly into the phone. He was wrong. Claire went quiet. Etta's voice steadied. I'm going to survive just fine. After the call ended, Etta remained standing there in silence. Then slowly she looked around the house one more time. The staircase, the ocean view, the walls she painted herself. Tomorrow, Divorce negotiations would begin officially. And for the first time, since this nightmare started, Etta Olson was no longer walking into that room as a broken wife. She was walking in as the woman Warren Whitmore failed to destroy. The divorce settlement meeting took place on a grey Thursday morning inside a private conference room overlooking downtown Stamford. Rain streaked the windows again, as if the universe insisted on dramatic weather every time Warren Whitmore lost something. Etta arrived first with Naomi Bennett. She wore a cream wool coat over a dark green dress and simple gold earrings her grandmother once gave her. No dramatic revenge outfit, no performance, just quiet composure. Naomi placed several organized folders neatly across the polished table. "You look calm," she observed. Etta stared out the window briefly. "I'm tired." Naomi nodded once. "Sometimes that's stronger than anger." 10 minutes later, Warren entered with his attorney. And for one suspended second, Etta barely recognized him. He looked thinner, older somehow. The sharp corporate confidence that once filled every room around him had fractured badly over the past few weeks. No luxury watch today, no polished smile, no effortless arrogance. Just a man watching his carefully constructed life collapse in slow motion. Behind him, Vivian entered quietly and sat near the back wall without speaking. Interesting. The queen of social control suddenly looked very small in legal spaces she couldn't manipulate emotionally. Warren glanced toward Etta the moment he sat down. Something complicated moved across his face. Regret, shame, longing, fear. Maybe all of it. Etta felt almost nothing in return. And that realization startled her more than anything else. Because once upon a time, one sad look from Warren Whitmore could emotionally destroy her for days. Now, he mostly looked like a stranger wearing memories she no longer trusted. The negotiations began immediately. Property ownership, asset distribution, financial disclosures. Naomi handled everything with terrifying precision. At one point, Warren's attorney attempted arguing implied marital equity regarding the house renovations. Naomi calmly slid inheritance records across the table. Primary acquisition came exclusively to Ms. Olson's inheritance trust. Renovation costs are extensively documented under her independent business income. The attorney went silent. Warren looked physically uncomfortable now. Good. For years, Etta sat quietly through conversations where her contributions disappeared. Now, they were documented professionally, line by line. Truth looked very different on paper. Vivian interrupted once during financial discussion. This marriage wasn't entirely Warren's fault. Naomi didn't even look up. Infidelity records suggest otherwise. Silence slammed into the room instantly. Vivian's mouth tightened sharply. Warren stared down at the table, embarrassed. Finally. The meeting stretched for nearly 2 exhausting hours. By the end, several realities became painfully clear. Warren's career future remained unstable, his financial position weakened significantly. Claire fully cooperated with internal investigations, and legally, Etta held overwhelming leverage. Not because she destroyed Warren, because Warren destroyed himself while assuming Etta would quietly absorb consequences. Eventually, Warren asked for a private conversation. Naomi looked toward Etta carefully. "Your choice." Etta hesitated briefly, then nodded once. Everyone slowly exited the conference room except Warren. Silence filled the space instantly. Warren stood near the windows, with both hands in his pockets, staring down at the city below. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then finally, "You really hate me now." Etta almost smiled sadly. Even now, he misunderstood her. Hate requires energy, she replied quietly. Warren flinched slightly. That answer hurt him more than screaming would have. He turned toward her slowly. I know I ruined everything. The honesty sounded unfamiliar coming from him. Too late, but real. Etta sat quietly at the far end of the conference table. You ruined yourself first. Warren looked down. I didn't think things would spiral this badly. Of course he didn't. Men like Warren always assumed they could manage fallout later. Manage women later, repair image later. He walked slowly toward the table. I miss you.
The words hung heavily in the air. And strangely, Etta believed him. Not enough. Not correctly. But genuinely. Because losing someone who loved you deeply leaves emptiness, even in selfish people. Warren sat across from her. The house feels empty without you. Etta stared at him calmly. No, she said softly. The house feels empty because you lost access to what I created. Pain flickered across his face. Good. Truth should hurt sometimes. Warren rubbed his jaw tiredly. I know you think I never loved you. Etta remained silent. Maybe I stopped appreciating things he admitted quietly. Maybe I got selfish. But what we had was real to me. That almost broke her. Because part of her would always mourn the version of Warren she fell in love with. But grief no longer changed reality. You loved being taken care of, she whispered. Warren looked genuinely wounded by that. That's not fair. No, Etta replied calmly. What wasn't fair was spending years making your life easier while you slowly searched for someone else. The room went silent again. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the city skyline. Warren's voice lowered. I never meant for this to happen. Etta looked directly into his eyes. You just never thought I'd leave. There it was. The truth. Warren couldn't deny it because both of them knew she was right. He looked away first. That answer alone told her everything. For years, Warren relied on Etta's emotional endurance more than actual partnership. And when people mistake your loyalty for weakness, they eventually stop valuing you entirely. Warren swallowed hard. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Etta believed that too. But consequences arriving late didn't erase destruction. A long silence passed between them. Then Warren said, quietly, I lost my position officially this morning. Etta's chest tightened unexpectedly. Not because she wanted him back. Because watching someone fall apart completely still hurt when you once loved them deeply. What happens now? She asked softly. Warren laughed bitterly under his breath. I don't know. The honesty sounded terrifying coming from a man who once planned everything obsessively. He looked smaller now. Not powerful attorney Warren Whitmore. Just a tired man, sitting in the wreckage of his own choices. Then he looked at her with something dangerously close to desperation. Come home with me tonight. Etta blinked slowly. Well, we can fix this. There it was. The panic. Not romantic realization. Fear of losing stability completely. Fear of loneliness. Fear of collapse. Warren leaned forward slightly. I know I don't deserve another chance. True. But I still love you. Etta stared at him quietly. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she realized something final. She no longer wanted him to love her. Because love without respect becomes emotional starvation, eventually. Etta stood slowly from the table. Warren watched her, carefully, hope flickering across his exhausted face. Then she spoke softly. I spent years trying to become enough for someone who had already decided to betray me. Warren's expression fell immediately, and now he whispered,
Etta looked at him one last time. I finally became enough for myself. The silence afterward felt enormous. Final. Warren closed his eyes briefly, like the words physically hurt. Maybe they did. Etta picked up her coat slowly, then walked toward the conference room door. But before leaving, she paused. Without turning around, she said quietly, "This stopped being your home a long time ago." Then she walked out. And for the first time in 6 years, Warren Whitmore had absolutely no way to stop her. 6 months later, Etta Olson stood barefoot in an empty house with ocean wind moving softly through the open windows. The Whitmore house no longer belonged to the Whitmores. And soon, it wouldn't belong to Etta either. Cardboard boxes lined the foyer neatly. Furniture had already been removed, except for a single cream-colored chair sitting near the window overlooking Long Island Sound. The house echoed now. Not sadly, just honestly. Etta walked slowly through each room one final time. The kitchen, where she cried quietly after family dinners. The staircase, where Warren once kissed her forehead before work. The dining room, where Vivian measured her worth like social currency. The guest room Warren slept in after the affair surfaced. Every corner carried ghosts. But they no longer owned her. That was the difference. Healing wasn't forgetting. Healing was remembering without collapsing. Her phone buzzed softly inside the pocket of her oversized cardigan. "Naomi, tell me you're not lifting heavy boxes yourself," Naomi said immediately. Etta smiled faintly. "I hired movers. I'm learning." "Good." Etta leaned lightly against the kitchen counter. The same counter where Warren once called her dramatic for discovering his affair. Funny how small that version of her life felt now. "You sound peaceful," Naomi observed. Etta looked toward the ocean. "I think I finally am." And surprisingly, it was true. Not constantly, not perfectly, but genuinely. Therapy helped. Distance helped. Time helped most of all. Time revealed uncomfortable truths about love and self-worth. Like how easy it was to confuse emotional endurance with devotion. How women were taught to celebrate loyalty even when it destroyed them. How kindness became dangerous when boundaries disappeared. Naomi's voice softened slightly. "You know, most people in your position would have kept the house permanently out of spite." Etta smiled sadly. "I loved this house. I know. But I don't want to spend the next 10 years walking through memories Warren poisoned." The silence between them felt understanding rather than lonely. That still amazed Etta sometimes. Healthy people listen differently. Naomi finally laughed softly. "So what now?" Etta looked around the nearly empty room. "Now I start over somewhere that doesn't remember who I used to be." After the call ended, Etta walked upstairs toward the master bedroom one final time. The room stood empty except for sunlight spilling across hardwood floors. No photographs, no clothes, no marriage. She remembered lying awake in this room for years, wondering why love suddenly felt lonely. Now she understood. You cannot feel emotionally safe beside someone already halfway gone. A soft knock downstairs interrupted her thoughts. The movers. Etta descended the staircase slowly. But when she opened the front door, Charles Whitmore stood there holding a small envelope. For a second, both of them looked surprised. Charles gave her a tired smile. "I won't stay long." Etta stepped aside quietly. He entered slowly, glancing around the nearly empty house. Strange seeing it like this? Etta nodded once. Yes. Charles looked older now. Not just physically, emotionally. Like the collapse of his family finally forced him to acknowledge years of silence. He handed her the envelope carefully. "What's this, a letter?" "From who?" Charles hesitated. Vivian. Etta blinked in surprise. Vivian Whitmore, writing a letter felt almost unnatural, as if emotion itself had to be outsourced onto paper. She wanted me to deliver it personally, Charles explained. Etta stared down at the envelope for several long seconds before setting it gently onto the counter unopened. Charles watched her carefully. You don't have to read it, I know. Silence settled softly around them. Then Charles asked quietly, How are you really doing? The question nearly broke her, because unlike everyone else in the Whitmore family, he sounded sincere. Etta exhaled slowly. Some days hurt more than others. Charles nodded. That's honest. She looked toward the windows. I think I spent so long trying to earn love that I forgot what peace felt like. Charles absorbed that quietly. Then he surprised her. Warren still talks about you constantly. Pain flickered instinctively through her chest before fading again, while Charles gave a sad smile. Because losing someone who truly loved you leaves a very specific kind of emptiness. Etta looked down. Part of her would probably always love Warren in some fractured, grieving way. But loving someone didn't mean returning to the version of yourself that disappeared beside them. Charles continued softly. He lives in a small apartment in Stamford now. Etta remained silent. He stopped drinking recently. Good. He's in therapy. Better. Charles hesitated briefly. I think he finally understands what he destroyed. Etta swallowed hard. For months, she dreamed of Warren understanding. Now that it finally happened, it no longer changed anything. That realization felt strangely freeing. Charles looked around the house again. You know, he said quietly, this place never felt warm before you. Tears burned suddenly behind Etta's eyes, because despite everything someone noticed, finally. Charles moved toward the door slowly, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. After he left, Etta stood alone in the quiet foyer holding Vivian's letter. She opened it slowly. The handwriting was elegant and restrained, exactly like Vivian herself. Etta, I spent years believing strength meant control. You proved me wrong. I judged your softness because I mistook gentleness for weakness. Perhaps that was my own failure. You loved my son better than he deserved. And despite everything, part of me believes he knows that now. I will not insult you with excuses, but I hope someday you remember yourself with kindness. Vivian Etta stared at the letter for a long time. No dramatic apology, no complete redemption, just honesty. Maybe the first honest thing Vivian Whitmore ever gave her. Outside, waves crashed softly against the shoreline. Etta folded the letter carefully and placed it inside her bag. Then she picked up the final box and carried it toward the front door. As she stepped outside, she turned back one last time. The house stood glowing softly in the late afternoon sunlight. Beautiful, painful, finished. And suddenly, Etta realized something extraordinary. She wasn't leaving this house because she lost it. She was leaving because she finally had the freedom to choose something else. The movers closed the truck behind her. An hour later, Etta drove north along the coast toward a small seaside town in Rhode Island, where a new house waited quietly near the water. Smaller, simpler, hers. No ghosts attached to it yet. No betrayal hidden in the walls. Just possibility. By sunset, she stood alone inside the new living room, surrounded by unopened boxes, while the salt air drifted through open windows. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the cliffs outside. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel lonely. It felt safe. Etta walked toward the windows slowly and opened them wider. Cold sea wind rushed inside, lifting her hair gently around her face. She closed her eyes. No Warren, no Vivian, no performance, no begging to be chosen, just herself. And somehow, after everything, that was finally enough.